All right, guys. So we are here with part two of the Q&A. Part one is on my channel, Brains and Gains podcast. Obviously, we're here on Abel's channel, so we'll dive into the next question.
Hi.
All right. So, fun one here from, let's see, Rohin Music. Has getting jacked helped with getting girls?
I would say that since I would actually consider myself like peak jacked in terms of like my progress,
Mm,
I've been not getting girls since then because I've been in a relationship at that point already. But being more muscular compared to how I looked like before I started, I would say yes, a little bit. Like it's common these days to say that, like, bro, if you're trying to get jacked because you think that women are gonna like you more, like women don't give a shit about muscle. And I, so I think there's truth in that, in the sense that there are too many other things that are more important than this, that by itself is just not going to be enough. Also, like I don't think that there was ever a girl or woman or old lady, just kidding, like any of the ladies I can think of in my life, I don't think any of them have ever seen me like shirtless before our first kiss, let's say. So yeah, but I would say that even for hooking up, just never go, like very rarely is it going to be enough to make up for these other things. So it's sort of like, I think it's good to look at it as like a very good bonus, at least as far as the direct success is concerned. So like, I chose you because you have a good body. Like it's kind of like, I think of it as, for me, most of the girls, women in my life have not been working out like much at all. And so someone could look at that and say, like, for me, this is just not important, or like, I just don't care about that at all. That's not true. When my wife decided that to get into working out, I was like very happy about it. So it's not that like I wouldn't have cared. It's just that there were too many other things that were more important. That like I did not make a problem out of this. So yeah, like I think. Oh, and just one more thing, like the indirect effect, however, I think that's much bigger. So like me having the self image of like, okay, so like I step in somewhere, I have a different posture, like a different look to me than other guys. Like not, and you don't have to see my body for that. Just seeing like, like a baggy t-shirt looks differently on you if you have quite a bit of muscle and you're leaner. So, and knowing that about yourself, like, I mean, over time, it does have an impact on the way you carry yourself. So that will definitely have an impact, because like I would say that the number one thing that I think influenced my success with and any sort of endeavor like that was the way I thought of myself. So when I thought that I was the king of the world, usually the world was kind of following suit. Like at least they made me feel like they are thinking that as well, and vice versa. I feel like, oh man, like I suck so badly. Like that's not a good recipe for being successful with the ladies. So
yeah. I think for sure status and a magnanimous personality is number one. Like I just know of so many guys I've met who, again, thinking back to college, where they were pretty average in most regards, but they were the life of the party. Everybody was
mhm.
talking to them. I mean, that's just such a huge factor. And of course, status probably more than anything. I mean, you can take the ugliest superstar there. What's that kind of heavy ginger guy's name? He's
Which one?
like a singer. He's a singer. Oh, Ed Sheeran.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah,
You
like,
just said heavy.
I think he's kind of chubby, isn't he?
Well, I don't know. He's a small guy in my mind, but
Yeah,
I could be wrong.
whatever. Like, that guy, again, just walking into a random room, nobody would probably pay him much attention. But given that he is Ed Sheeran, I mean,
Oh,
obviously, he'd have just like thousands and thousands of women very interested in him. So stuff like that. I mean, there's really almost nothing you'll see. Even like I remember my dad referencing that, like, with the Beatles when they would come out, and it was just insane, like just thousands of women just screaming. Obviously, Justin Bieber's
mm,
another example. Anybody like that, right? I mean, it's just a completely different thing
yeah.
entirely. And then if you're talking, and if you're just strictly speaking about superficial aspects, I would say toss up between height and facial aesthetics, and then
Yeah, yeah.
muscularity under
I would say
that.
it's probably 50-50. Like if you look at women, like which one? Like height, I do know some women who like legit just seem not to care.
Yeah.
Like it's like, so who is this guy? It's like brown hair, whatever. It's like like tall, short. It's like tall, tall, and it's like I meet the guy and it's like up at my waist, and
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like, well, but he's taller than me. It's like, well, okay, but like you're whatever, like
Right,
four
right.
foot something. But
Yeah, and it's also like I just hope people wouldn't worry about that too much because even like I knew a lot of female athletes and the majority of them wanted to date a taller guy in part because a lot of the men who were athletes were tall. But it's like I would just given that there's literally nothing you can do about that, I would just hope people don't worry about that sort of thing. And there's just so many people who don't care about it that it's just not worth getting hung up on. And again, it's just kind of a bonus kind of a thing, right? But I would put being jacked even under that.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
Cool. All right, and that brings us into a nice introduction to Abel and I are starting a men's life advice channel. So check us out at Alpha DMA.
Alpha, alpha, alpha say no to beta. Alpha
No,
never beta.
very, very much not doing that. All right. So some of these, like just for people who are sending in questions, if it's something like some of these are like, well, what can I do to gain weight? Obviously, the answers on that are going to be quite short. Obviously, you need to be a calorie surplus, things like that. Favorite ab movements. For me personally, and that's a short one that we can go into. I haven't actually directly trained my abs in years. When I did, I think a basic crunch, like a rope crunch and a reverse crunch, is about as complex as I got it. But again, I haven't focused it much because I've just kind of naturally had pretty good abs. What about you, Abel?
Yeah. So I haven't had naturally good abs, but I also haven't done ab exercises, but I think I should have. And actually, so this is so I'm gonna mention my favorite exercises in a moment. Is just it was actually a very useful experience now to see what an impact it would have that now I was not doing ab exercises, nor was I doing these heavy compound lower body lifts, which
Yeah.
would like require the most bracing and everything. And I can now actually see the impact of lower body, like heavier lifting
Yeah, yeah.
on the core, because I would say I absolutely lost muscle from my core to where it's noticeable. So like, so you mentioned like my arms look lean, and so I still would say I'm not too lean now, but like I have an idea of like how my midsection looks at this point, where my face looks like this, but my arms look like this, and they just look noticeably less lean now.
Hmm.
So yeah, like I guess for those people who say that like squats and things like that don't really train the abs, and it's just a cliche that people say that like those are actually good stimulus for the abs. Now I can tell you that this is my test. They are stimulating the abs very much, and you will notice the difference. But I think as far as ab exercises, I think that really crunches that basically have a heavy emphasis on like spinal flexion in a way that's safe are going to be the best. So really any sort of like a stability ball, which has like a non-moving bottom, and you can like sort of like arch over it with your back. That's going to be very good because like it gives you that extended range of motion. A decline sit up or a decline crunch is going to be also good. Just don't do a decline sit up with like straight back, because like that's going to be basically like isometric for the abs, and it's going to be like a lot of hip flexor. Like I can actually fry my hip flexor with those to the point where like it will hurt to just pull up my leg when I'm like tying my shoes. So and in my abs it's just not going to be that great. And then yeah, like you can get one of these ab mats. Like I have one of those, for example. I just don't use it for crunches, but you can like arch over those as well, and that will also give you like a nice extended range of motion. So
Yeah.
that would be
Yeah, it's
it.
funny with I hadn't done pull-ups in years. This was like many years ago. And for whatever reason, I just did 10 sets of three. So obviously it wasn't very difficult. The next 2 days, my abs were so sore just from trying to stabilize. Now, again, I wasn't
Mm,
training abs at all, but I was amazed by that. And I did really think about that at one point where I was like, I always used to, like, I never have really done trap training, but I was doing deadlifts
mm,
all the time. Same thing with abs. I wasn't doing direct ab
yeah.
training, but I was doing deadlifts, overhead press, squats, all that. And now that I'm not doing those, I have thought, like, should I potentially be doing more trap work directly? The ab work, again, I don't really care much about it. But given that I mean, really, I'm not, I told you guys recently, I've actually not been doing pull-ups for a few months now. I'm not doing overhead press. So I'm actually not doing pretty much any,
Do you work out though? Just kidding.
I do not even want to. Yeah, it's actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I really don't do almost anything that directly stimulates the core. Now I'm doing like the McGill Big Three and stuff like that. So in that sense, they're getting worked differently than they have historically. But yeah, it's not something I really focus on. And it definitely does make a difference when you're doing all of that different core work for sure.
Yeah, yeah, the traps are also a good example. Like I actually lost from my neck. So that's yeah, I took some pictures the other day and I was like, why do I hate these pictures? And I noticed that like because like I have that thing that I hate that like neck is going up and it's like whoop, like this ball on top of it. And it's not saying that it was like in one line the whole thing, but I was closer to it.
Yeah,
And it
yeah,
was like, what the hell? And it's like, well, yeah, because like those RDLs were like really far and few between for a long time now.
yeah, yeah,
So
right. Um, how many meals a day do you eat? How much protein do you eat on a daily basis? From Rafael Fernandez Zulate.
yeah, I eat I would say so realistically, so basically I have one meal or one and a half and I have like some shakes under it. Like that's kind of my protocol these days. So like it's um I always had a bit of an issue with this sort of like afternoon sleepiness or just like post meal sleepiness if I kind of time it wrong. And I just came to hate that feeling like so badly that I'm really just trying to avoid it at all costs. Like sometimes, like today was one of those days just couldn't resist. Like, okay, I'm gonna have an actual meal. It was a non-working day, so my wife was at home, so we were kind of just like hanging out.
Mhm.
So it was like, okay, I'm gonna have a comatose state like all afternoon. I don't care. But normally I hate it because I want to be a bit more productive. So it's like just the easiest way for me to get around it is just avoid solid food for as long as possible. But you can, I could make it work in other ways, but this is just very easy.
Yeah.
And then like at the end of the day, I will have like some actual food. So what about you?
Okay. Almost every day is 3 meals a day, sometimes four, but almost always three. And protein, anywhere between 170 to 200 grams of protein a day. I know that, some would argue that it's overkill, but there's indications for even higher protein. So I should say there's some evidence that it could be helpful in certain circumstances. And so I'm used to it.
Definitely not worse. So
Yeah, yeah. So I stick with around 1 gram per pound these days. It's pretty simple for me, and I don't really complicate it. Even if with my clients that are looking for macros, I usually have people just start with calories and protein, and we can get into the nitty-gritty with carb and fat distributions. But for the most part, that's what I focus on.
yeah. And by the way, I'm actually I I used to love protein rich foods a lot more.
Hmm.
But and actually I still kind of do. So maybe this is like actually a habit that I developed through like dieting so much. But like I became like so volume focused through all those diets that I just noticed that I get more bang for my buck from like potatoes and veggies and things like that, and fruits,
Yeah.
of course. So maybe that's why.
Yeah, taste-wise, protein sources are generally my least favorite, I would say, even though I eat plenty of them.
Unless it's some nice dairy product.
Yes, yeah. All right. So related to that, Ahmed Mundi asks, do you eat the same way every day, or do you enjoy variety in your meals?
Hmm. I eat pretty much the same way every day. Like, and actually, that's one nice thing about eating the way I just described, or any sort of like intermittent fasting, modified intermittent fasting kind of protocol is that by the time your meal times come around, like you always make yourself kind of just hungry enough, even if you're gaining phase, like you're gonna build up at least some appetite for that.
Sure.
And so it's harder to burn out on your like daily foods if you're like properly hungry for them. So yeah, and meal structure is pretty much the same. So it's either this, like kind of like avoid solid food until later in the day, and then have a bigger meal, or um, or basically just giving in and eating like some more solid food and being in a coma for the
Yeah,
rest of
yeah,
the day.
right.
So
I actually have quite a different structure throughout the week. So on Mondays, I still have done a 24-hour fast for a long time. So I finish eating Sunday night and then I don't eat again until Monday. I just kind of like not having to eat during that time. And it's a very busy day for me. So it's nice to just not have to worry about it. And then at the end of the day, I have a shake or I have some protein bars or whatever. So it's very convenient. It also allows me to not really think about it while creating a large deficit so that I can eat more on other days. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I'm usually seeing patients those days. So I might eat. So, like, for example, right now, I'm only at, I won't, let's use not maybe right now as I'm dieting, but let's just say I'm maintaining, just to give an example. Maybe I'll be averaging 3,000 calories. And that might look like, 500 to 1,000 on Monday, just a night. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, because I'm so busy, it's just not like a lot of times I don't even want to eat my lunch. Like I'm just kind of doing my thing and
mm,
it might be kind of filling. So that might be 2,000 to 2,500 calories. And then Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I'm home most of the time. And so there's just more time that I could be thinking about food. There's also going to be more social events during that time. Maybe we're going to go out somewhere. And so those days could be 3,000 up to 4,500. And so there's quite a big swing towards the weekends most of the time. I actually just saw
mm,
on Greg Knuckles' podcast with Dr. Pack and Milo, and they were saying, there's not really much research on this, but their intuition is that it's better to have the same thing every day. And the reality is, I mean, you can make arguments in both directions. There are full ebooks and articles out there regarding cyclical nutrition intake and like when carb cycling was big for years. And it's like, oh, well, you want to have your low days on your off days. And then like back and leg, you want to have a high day. And then on your other muscle groups, you want to have a moderate day and you're going to lose fat on these lower days and gain muscle on the high days and this is how you're going to recomp. And I don't really believe any of that stuff. I know some people make that argument or they'll say like cyclical ketogenic diets, your diet, you're losing fat throughout the week and you have these high carbs on the weekend and that's how you're going to recomp and all of that. And then other people would make the argument that they were making, which is like, hey, it's probably better to just have be like a slight surplus every single day. I don't think the body is necessarily working. I mean, obviously there's circadian rhythm, but I don't think when it comes to this aspect, it necessarily just works on a 24-hour time period. I can tell you that some of my
yeah.
best gains was my sophomore year of college, where I netted 8 pounds of muscle, bulking up 25 pounds, cutting down, and I netted 8 pounds at the same waistline. And during that time, it was my first year trying intermittent fasting. So I was just, doing the classic 16-8 from Martin Burkhan. So I went from 6 meals a day down to three. I went from, eating probably about 16 hours a day to now only eating 8 hours a day. And I was working with a coach at the time who had people doing these ridiculously big 10,000 calorie cheats. So throughout the week, I was eating 2,500 calories. Saturdays, I would have 8 to 10,000 calories. And then Sunday, I would basically fast and I'd have like, a cup of cottage cheese at the end of the day. And I put 100 pounds on my deadlift that year. I mean, I made fantastic gains. So I'm not saying that that was ideal and the best way to eat, but I can tell you it certainly didn't seem to impair much in terms of results. The previous year, I had netted 7 pounds of muscle. So even though I was more advanced now, I had actually gained more muscle the following year, and I netted, effectively 15 pounds of muscle my first 2 years of
Mm.
college there. So I just think that when it comes to this stuff, focus more on your preference. I don't think that you should be having like 1,000 calories 3 days in a row so that you can, binge the other 4 days. But if you're even talking 1,000 calorie swings here and there, I just personally have not experienced any issue with that. And I think the body's going to make up for it. But I understand that like mechanistically, you could come up with arguments as to why you shouldn't do that.
All right, in the following section, I went onto a ramble which was not only embarrassingly stuttery and just bad sounding, but it also made zero sense. So let me attempt to actually explain what I tried to say. So my point was something along the lines of the more you're shifting your caloric load across the week to the extremes, so for example, undercutting severely for 5 days and then having really high calories for 2 days, or anything similarly extreme, the more and more you're increasing the likelihood that your results might not be as desired, because these are extreme approaches which are just not so time tested. And so when you're embarking on something like this, I think it's a matter of your mentality. I like to advise people to actually ask themselves the question, which scenario would you have an easier time accepting or dealing with mentally? Let's say you don't get your results and you followed the approach that you actually enjoyed, for example, undercutting for 5 days and then having really high calories on the weekends. In that case, your way of coping with the lack of results could be by saying, well, I didn't get my results, but at least I really enjoyed myself. So I would say time was well spent. Some people will totally be on board with this way of thinking, and this will be sufficient to ease their minds. However, for some people, their mindset will eternally be, oh man, what could have been? What if I did this and this? What if I tried to optimize things a bit more? And they just won't be able to free themselves of these thoughts. If it's more likely that your mindset would be the latter, then maybe for you it would be actually worth it to just be rather safe than sorry and do something a bit more conventional and quote-unquote normal with your eating pattern. So yeah, basically that was my point, and I just did a really shitty job trying to get this across on this Q&A. I mean, hell, even narrating it like this wasn't exactly easy. So yeah, moving on. I think it comes down to what your mentality is. So like I like to just advise people to ask themselves this question, like what would you rather like to regret if, God forbid, you don't have results? Like, okay, so or if you do have results but you missed out on things, or like if you had to sacrifice enjoyment. So like if you end up jacked but like you ate this way, like would you hate it so much that afterwards you would be like, man, like yeah, maybe I made gains, but like fuck, like was this worth it? Like I missed out on so much. Like I actually missed out on a lot of things. Like I think for my standards I got jacked, and some things I missed out on which I would rather have those things than like, and I would miss out on some muscle happily. But on the other hand, like, you know, if I spend the next 5 years doing something which is kind of bizarre, and then at the end of it I look back and say like, well, I don't know, like could I have gained a lot more if I just didn't do this? Then yeah, like that would definitely bother me. So like if that's an issue for you, like the potential of having to regret that like you missed out on gains, then maybe don't go for these huge extremes. So
Yep.
was this understandable at all? Like in the mean, at the end, I was like, this sounds very, very confusing as I'm listening to myself.
Yeah, I think so.
We can
Um,
cut, or I mean, you will send it to me, right? So I can just, I guess, cut it
we're
out.
keeping it live, everybody. So this one not super related, probably a quick one. Do you like arm wrestling?
Who? It's like every year, at least, every month, at least 3 times, I'm telling someone that I will never arm wrestle again.
I actually, when I was in grade school, that was a thing, and I was actually, I mean, quote unquote, pretty good at it for somebody who didn't know what they were doing. And I remember beating this kid in arm wrestling, and then like later down the road, we played tug of war. And I was so surprised that he beat me in tug of war because I just thought, oh, I beat him in arm wrestling. Of course I am stronger. And meanwhile, I was probably 120 pounds and he was probably 160 pounds. Like, of course, there's a huge, huge weight aspect. But that's like my main memory of arm wrestling is just that everybody, all the boys in eighth grade were doing it, and that I was pretty good at it, and I was shocked that that did not mean that I was stronger elsewhere. But
Mm,
obviously, it's gotten huge, huge in the like the YouTube and Instagram circles and whatnot. I see like Devin Larratt and whatnot all over the place. I will
yeah.
admit, I do click on some of these videos. The clickbait gets me, and it's like Brian Shaw is doing arm wrestling now, and I'm kind of curious of what that's going to look like. And Larry Wheels has gotten into it, and all of that. I think it's cool, just like I think any sort of quote unquote combat sport, and this person versus another person is interesting. I have zero interest in doing it myself after seeing some of the accidents and whatnot, and even
Yeah.
just injury
So that's
potential is in general, no way.
yeah.
But it's cool to look at.
It's so like for arm wrestling, I have like two dominant memories. One is there was this summer camp that I used to go to when I was like 13, like 12, 13, I think maybe 14. I still went, and there was this kid who maybe was like a year older than me, and he was like country like champion of Hungary wrestler, and he was jacked like for I mean I don't know how he would seem now, probably he would look like a kid but like at 13 I mean
Yeah,
he had abs, and he was not like one of these like skeleton kids with abs, but like he had like shape, like looked like he had a shoulder shape like me here, like you don't see kids like that normally.
yeah.
So I was like, and I was already into like wanting to get jacked. Like I even started kayaking because I heard that kayakers were jacked, and and so like he was like my idol basically. And I mean, we never interacted. Like we were just not hanging out with the same circles, but there was like some arm wrestling. I don't know. Like there was this big like event and like different challenges, and there was arm wrestling somewhere, and somehow we ended up going up against each other, and guess what, I beat him.
Oh yeah.
Like yeah, and the thing is that like I beat him, and I remember like almost feeling like guilty, like it's like I wanted to like diminish my like what I did, because like man, like this was not supposed to happen. Like
Oh,
I
I'm
mean
sure
he
it must
he,
have
he
killed him at that age. Yeah.
Oh yes, yes. But the thing is that he asked me like, so what sports do you do, or what sport do you do? It was like, phew, man, like the glory I felt in that moment. Like he just asked me what sport I do. Oh my god. So he didn't say like, oh man, like, this is bullshit. Like my arm is broken or something.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
It's so funny
Um,
looking back at like early memories of that, like the people who you thought were so jacked as a young age that probably were not at all, and all that stuff. It's always amusing to think back
yeah,
on that.
yeah, yeah. That's what I wanted to say when I talked about the standards changing. Like Jason Scott Lee. You know who that is?
No.
He yeah, so whatever, I'll send you a picture afterwards, and like anybody listening, like look it up. He was playing like there was a movie about Bruce Lee's life, and he was playing Bruce Lee, and he played Mowgli in Jungle Book, in
Okay.
some older movie. Like he looks good, but like I remember that like
Oh, I'm looking him up
he
now.
was like unbelievably jacked,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
to my like I mean I looked at his pecs as like whoa, like he has insane pecs, and he has good pecs, but I mean he looks like a swimmer, maybe not even.
Right, right.
So
That's funny.
it's funny to think of him as that, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
uh,
Let's see. So Pavel asks, if you're forced to train only 3 times per week and your goal is to keep getting muscle, how would you do it? So I'll start with this one because I've done a lot more 3 day per week training than Abel. I
yeah.
remember this guy years back telling me he just didn't think you could get much muscle on 3 days a week, and nobody does that. And it was just such a weird conversation because this person was well aware of DC training and like Mensa and like many routines where people have gotten jacked on 3 days a week. I'm not saying that that is the ideal number of days per week for everybody. Who was the other guy? Ken Skip Hill was another guy who had gone to 3 days a week, and even that one, he was just doing push pull leg. So genuinely just one time per week per body part. Because like some things, if you were obviously doing upper lower, you could get on average 1.5 times per week full body, you could get 3 times per week. But a push-pull legs, you're truly dividing those up, and people do that all the time. So kind of depends on how long you want to work out and how much of your results you're trying to get. So if you're saying I want to get 100% of my possible muscle growth, I still think that could be possible on 3 days a week. Again, like DC training, I will say the advanced, there's advanced DC splits beyond just the one that most people are familiar with, where they do go to 4, even 5 days per week of training. But um, I think you can get tremendous size, and you just have to have the sufficient volume and intensity. And that just might mean that you have particularly long workouts. I mean, you might have 2 hour workouts, and that's just how it is. But that might be far more convenient, especially if you're driving to a gym that's 30 minutes away. And you're like, hey, I'd rather do more each time I'm here than to have to come 5 times. I think that's completely fine. Um, Again, you're going to have to structure in a way that perhaps you're doing, and this is generally how most people set up their routines, you're doing the more fatiguing exercises first so that towards the end you don't need as much focus. Although I will
Mm.
say DC sometimes does the opposite of that as well, where they will actually put like the crazy leg exercises at the very end because they say it's so taxing that when you're done with that, you want to just go home. And that's their argument for it. I understand that, but man, to me, mentally, if I have like an hour and a half workout and I know the whole time I still have to do the hardest thing at the end, that sucks. Like right now, if I think of my workouts, most of my workouts have 6 to 8 exercises. And when I'm done the first half of those, there's a little bit of a mental relief of like, all right, those were the big ones. And now it's just arms, or now it's just, whatever that is, some calf raises and leg curls or something. So it's definitely I would prefer to do the bigger exercises first. But in any case, I think you can gain
Yeah,
the
it's
vast majority of your size on 3 days a week. You just got to do sufficient volume. Or if you say, hey, I have 3 days a week and I have 1 hour to train, you might not get to your maximum potential on that. You probably won't. I mean, you really have to have like a perfectly structured routine. But you could still get the majority of it, right? So there's a
yeah.
lot of ways to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just run into, at the advanced level, you might run into practical problems. Like even on 6 days a week, like there are things that come up, like you have the odd workout where you just don't feel your best, and like at the end of the workout, it's kind of like just dragging along, or like you get bored, like you're just going through the motions. The gym is crowded, so like a couple of pieces of equipment that you need to wait for. If you have like how many exercises are you going to squeeze in? Like if you're doing 3 days a week, like at the advanced level, that might mean like having to do, I don't know, like 12, 15 lifts or something like that, or just a lot of sets per exercise. And that's viable. It's just practically inconvenient. So like that could be the only thing. And like you also like just that mental fortitude that tends to go by the end of the session. That could be a problem. But if it's not, then like you can find ways around it. Then I guess it's fine. Like only one more thing, just as that's on the positive side, is that what is good about less frequent training, and that which is a lot trickier when you're training 6 days a week or 7, is for one, it kind of forces you to be resourceful. So I think when you have all the time to spend in the gym, it's easy to get into this mindset of like, well, you kind of start viewing everything as essential because like you can really put everything in almost.
Yep.
So then, and that's when these like Frankenstein training programs are born. So it's good to like strip down your training occasionally and just see like, okay, like really what are the essential ones? And then when you go back to like 6 or 7 or 5 to 7 days a week, it might actually look different at that point because like you have a more like you have the foundations, and then you're just like sprinkling things on top of it. And then also like what's good is that you need to be a lot less I guess conservative with how you're sequencing exercises, the frequency of exercises per week. Like, if you're like benching 3 days a week on a 3-day a week routine, you might be a lot more likely to get away with that than if you're training 6 days a week, and then you might run into some weird like overuse injury, or like, okay, Wednesday I'm going to be deadlifting, Friday I'm going to be squatting. If you train like 6 days a week or something, like you're not going to put like squats and deadlifts on 2 consecutive workouts. So it simplifies a lot of things, and that's kind of a nice thing. So
Yep, for sure.
that's my addendum.
All right. So last question for this round. Dan
Jesus.
asks, what makes food have an addictive property? Insulin response? Question mark.
I mean, very simply put, is that it's tasty, basically. I actually had I think one of my best videos for my Hungarian channel, which is, that's kind of a Hungarian privilege to see those, or understand those. Basically, I was just going through how, so what is it that is making, or like, let's look at one of the ingredients that is often said to be addictive, which is sugar. It's like, okay, so sugar is addictive, right? So let's like, what do we actually see? Like, do we see people like pouring foods in, or sugar into their mouth, like a drug addict? It's like, well, no, not really. That's not typical. So okay, then maybe it's just foods that have a lot of sugar. It's like, okay, so what foods what foods have a lot of sugar? Like fruits, for example, right? So watermelon, bananas, like these things have a lot of sugar, or predominantly sugar. Is that what people get like really overweight on? Not really. So then, okay, then what else? Like, maybe it's sugar and fat together. Well, okay, maybe, but do we see like someone putting like lard or olive oil and like pouring sugar into it and like eating that? It's like, well, it doesn't sound that appealing. Like, okay, then what are those foods? And it's like, well, like Snickers bars, pizza, like things like that. And it's like, okay, like these kind of have a combo of things, but what is most common in them is that they're just really, really tasty. So, I mean, that is the main thing. And then you combine tastiness with the variety, with basically a bunch of other things that are shown to drive us to overeat. And a lot of those are actually just psychological factors. But basically, it's food environment combined with just really tasty food is what's driving overeating, and feeling like it's addictive. But it's basically almost never a particular ingredient in food that is doing it. So that's my analysis of the situation.
Yeah. I don't know if he was asking just on what causes overeating or also like the actual addiction. Because he had asked about insulin, and I mean,
Oh
their
yes.
insulin has a factor related to dopamine release. So, dopamine is somewhat responsible for, I don't want to say responsible for addictions. Mechanistically, if something is causing a higher dopamine release, right, especially if it's something that's acute and you can clearly make that correlation between this action or this pattern and that dopamine release, that can then set up addictive behavior. So that would be my answer for that is I think just generally speaking, anything that's going to cause a huge dopamine release. If that's somebody who like you'll see kind of like what we were talking about before, right? With our thoughts on like when we were really dieted down, right? More than
Mm,
likely when we were super dieted and then we had whatever that dessert or whatever that food was, there was a large dopamine release and that hit. Now, one of the differences I think that happens with food compared to, let's say, like a cocaine addiction or something like that is eventually there's feedback mechanisms whereby you're satiated, right? And so if you have a normal physiology, most people will have that large dopamine response to eating, let's say, a very tasty meal as they're very lean. And then as you get to that quote unquote set point, you'll see that less. And then as you get more and more higher body fat, you'll really see a pullback where you're not even enjoying that at all. So in some ways, food addictions are the hardest addiction in that you can't get away from it, right? If somebody's addicted to cocaine or alcohol, you can say, okay, I'm going to step out of that environment where you really can't do that with food, right? I've known people who were anorexic or bulimic who said it's so difficult because they just can't escape it. But in another sense, at least there are some of these physiologic mechanisms by which, and you might end up being at a higher body fat than you like, but usually some of that is going to pull back. Whereas I'm not aware of physiologic mechanisms whereby it's like, okay, I've had enough cocaine and now the addiction's like handled. You know what I mean? So different in that
yeah.
regard.
Yeah, it's insidious in a number of ways. The availability is definitely one thing. Also, just like how intertwined it is with everything in our culture. So, like, if you're going to change your eating habits, you are going to impact in one way or another your social life as well, and your relationships as well. And I mean, honestly, in a best case scenario, so like there's almost no scenario in which it's not going to impact it in some way. In a best case scenario, it's just not going to harm it because you're surrounding yourself with good people and you treat them well as well. And so you can just, smoothly sort it out together or have it not be impacting the relationship. And then another thing is that, like, out of these like non like recreational drug or alcohol and things like that, type addictive things, like this might be like food might be the only thing or one of the few things where the for one, like the actual like reward feeling that you're getting from it is quite large. So like eating something really tasty is quite rewarding in a way that maybe only like sex and like the reward that you're getting from that can be compared to it. So yeah, sure, like it's really nice to look at like a nice sunset or whatever, but I mean it cannot really be compared to the pleasure of that you get from these things. And then what's also very dangerous with these is that the reward can be, and the stimulus as well, can be like escalated in a way that is very hard to do with other things, and usually can only be accomplished with drugs. And by escalation, I mean basically just extending that feedback loop. So, like maybe it's really nice to have a glass of water when you're really thirsty, and maybe it's even nicer to have two. But if you have 5 or 6, that's gonna feel bad.
Right.
Yeah. With food, like, okay, so like it's really nice to have a salad if you're really hungry. Once you're full, like, okay, like you might still want some pastry. Okay, now you're full for that. Like, if I put some nice cheese on that pastry, maybe I want some more. Then there comes the point where like I don't want anything salty, but sweet could still come. So like you can just keep like increasing the stimulus in a way that you still want more of it. And again, like it's only accomplishable with sexual stimulus, basically, if you don't use drugs, and more specifically, like using online porn sources. Like, naturally, it cannot really be done unless you're like 13 years old. So it's it is just really a unique thing in the world of like natural stimuli. So one has to be careful with it, really.
Yeah, for sure. Cool, guys. All right. Well, we got a good amount of time for both channels here. Like I said, part 1 is on my channel. Got part 2 here, and we'll wrap it up. Abel, any final thoughts?
Not really. It was just good to do this. If I felt less than, or if I sounded less than perfectly coherent, like now, it's because I am, and it's because I'm rusty. So this was
Yeah, welcome
doing
back to
something like
YouTube,
this.
man.
Yeah, it's I feel like a little bit like a YouTube virgin.
A born again YouTube virgin.
Yeah, but it's good to be back. So yeah, it's only gonna get better. So looking forward to doing more stuff like this.
Cool. Thanks, man.
All right.